father came from Plymouth, and my granddad, my father's father, was an amateur boxer and then a labourer on the docks. He had two sisters, both older than he was. My grandfather tended to drink quite a lot, and often if he won a match he wouldn't come home for several weeks, and it got so bad at one stage my grandma and her two daughters and my granddad were destitute. So they took them into care, but they didn't take boys into care. So what they did, they rented my dad out as a baker's assistant, and my grandma and my two aunties had to go into a hostel. When the system was that when the child was returned home again, then they ceased to be doing the job, but the council got paid while the people were working for the bakers. And my grandma kept track. When they got the family sorted out again, my grandma went on several times to the council to try to find out where my father was and who he was working for, because she wanted him home again, and they wouldn't tell her. But one day my father, his first job was to keep the fires going at night, and then in the morning he'd have his breakfast, and then he'd be sent out taking, right till after dinner time, taking loaves of bread and cooked food variously around Plymouth. He ran into one of his sisters who told him to come with him, and he left his bike outside the baker's shop and he went back to his family. His two sisters, one had 7 children, the other had 6 children, and they've now got children, and there must be about, I think we have about 50 odd relatives, 50, 60 relatives there now. We went to when one of my auntie's husbands died. My grandma and my granddad lived in Gateshead, and my granddad came from the Isle of Man, but my grandma was local. My granddad worked as a carpenter on the docks to do with the ships, and he installed the fittings and the cupboards when the boats were made. So it was very much seasonal work, because to build a ship and then they put all the cupboards and the cabins in and all the furniture afterwards, and he only had work for maybe 6 or 7 months, and then it all stopped and they were all unemployed. But the Tyne, which ran between Gateshead and Newcastle, was a very big river, and it was mainly for shipbuilding. Also within the area around the Durham area there was coal mining. My grandma and granddad had 3 children. They had a son and 2 daughters. My mother was the youngest daughter. My brother went to Australia when he was 15 in an indentured system they had for people to go and work out there. And he stayed in Australia, and he had 5 children, and there's now around about 30 relatives living in Australia. And my sister went to live in Australia, and her eldest son was born in Australia, and they quite liked it, but she couldn't stand the temperature. My Auntie Essie had 4 children. She had Charlie, who was the oldest boy. She had Mary, who was the next girl. She had Irene, who was a younger one, and she had Charlie, who was the youngest one of the group.
You said Charlie twice.
Sorry. Oh. She had 4 children. She had Charlie, who was the oldest. She had Mary, who was the next. She had Irene, who was the next.
the girl.
No, there was another lad yet.
No.
John, who was an ex, who went to live in Australia with his relatives, and then she had one more daughter who went to live in America. My mother and her sister Essie was very, very close together, and we often, Peter and I, used to go to Gateshead, where my mother went to see her mum and dad, and also a sister and relatives, and we went every summer, and we used to go for 6 weeks, because my mother used to go there and then leave us there for about 4 weeks, then come back to Lancashire. But when we came back from Gateshead, we were Geordies. We picked up all the dialects and all the accents, and it took her quite a while to get her to speak a little bit differently from that. Charlie ended up a coal mine architect. He was looking to see the safety aspects of coal mining, and he stayed in that job till he died. Mary went to teacher training college, and then she went to Nigeria, and she actually married the assistant district commissioner for Nigeria, and she had a very posh wedding in the governor's house. Irene got married from a local boy, and she had 2 children, and John went to Australia when he was 21, around 21, and he had 2 children. The holidays we had in Gateshead with our cousins were great. We really enjoyed them. They lived at a place called Lobley Hill, and there was also windmills in that area as well, in Bensham, and it was the area, quite a nice area which overlooked the Tyne, and there was a playground there, and there was also what they called Saltwell Park, and that was a park which was about half a mile away, and my brother and I used to often catch the trams and go onto the park. And the park is the only place where I've ever seen a statue to the Boer War. It's I've never seen one anywhere, but they'd got a statue to the Boer War just on the entrance. And if you went into the park, there was a big lake where my brother and I used to go on, and it was really enjoyable, and the holidays there were great. My auntie's children were allowed to have free meals even during the holidays, and they often took us with them, and the only requirement there was we were Geordies. My brother and I had to pretend to be Geordies, and the dinner ladies used to laugh at us because they always made us try to talk in Geordie, why I hinny, and words like that, and it was quite funny, but we really enjoyed it. Charlie's now dead. I went to his funeral with my wife, and Irene and Mary died after him, and Irene died, and John's died, so that all the family's gone now, and my Auntie Essie and my Uncle Charlie, he's gone as well, so they've all gone now, but the time in Gateshead and Newcastle was one of fun, because we grew up all together, and we always had at least 6 weeks in Gateshead every year, so we really were close together. I understand a relative of my granddad in Gateshead was associated or involved with the charge of the Light Brigade. He was something to do with looking after horses. I don't think he was in the charge with the Sabres. I think he was more, he was one of the people who looked after the horses and cleaned them down and everything. My father was born in Plymouth. He was the youngest of 3 children, and his dad was a semi-professional boxer. Most of the people in Plymouth worked in the Navy because they had a big shipyard there, but my father didn't want to do. So one day they were enrolling for the army, and he went and he took the King's Shilling and he joined the army. And it was the best things that ever happened to him, because they taught him a lot about etiquette, behaviour, and also about he drove a motorbike there. They taught him to drive a motorbike. And then after he'd been in the army for around about 2 or 3 years, he was told he was going to a place called Germany, and they wanted him in the military police. Now there was no military police then. They used to just have a red armband on, but he was classified as a military policeman, and he went to Germany. And when they got there, they had no transport at all, and they had to find their way to the place. And the reason for that was that Germany didn't want the League of Nations involved with the plebiscite when Hitler, regarding Hitler coming to power. And then when they did get the motorbikes, they decorated with swastikas and German emblems. And then when he came back, he left the army and he took a job labouring in the shipyards in Plymouth. My mother, she was born in Gateshead, and she was the youngest daughter with 2 older siblings, her sister Essie and her brother, I think it was Charlie. Charlie at 15 went as an indentured apprentice to Australia because he couldn't get any work. My mother passed for grammar school and she was on a scholarship, but because of the financial circumstances she had to leave, and she took a job as a scullery maid at a big house in London. My Auntie Essie stayed with my grandma and granddad. My granddad was a cabinet maker in the dockyard, and when the ships had been built, he was one of those people who went in and finished them off with the cabinets and the tables and all the things like that. And it was very, very much seasonal work. My mother worked as a servant in this house for quite a while, and then when she was 18, she was allowed to leave, and she went to work at Siemens, welding cables for telephone exchanges. And one day she was invited to go to a dance with a lot of other girls, and there were some young soldiers who'd been invited as well, and it was just to get to know, and they went to this dance, and she met my father, who she subsequently married. When they got married, they actually moved into barracks, Fulwood Barracks, and I was actually born in Woolwich Military Hospital, attached to the army, and I was brought up there. And then my father became quite proficient in understanding of explosives, and he was seconded to Exton, which was a munitions factory close to Leyland. And he worked there as an inspector, and he was inspecting shells for the army and bullets before they were transported, so he was an inspector. When the war broke out, he then had to go to Aldershot, and they were sorting an army out, and he was actually sent on the expeditionary force to Germany. Have I told about him going to Germany initially?
Yes, how did you end up in Leyland? Because he was in Exton.
Well, we got accommodation with a family called the Wilsons, and we lived as lodgers at Earnshaw Bridge, at the bottom of Golden Hill Lane, in a one-roomed house while my dad was working there. And then we managed to get a house in Leyland Road, and near Leadale Road, and we lived there. And then we got another house in Earnshaw Drive, which is 62 Earnshaw Drive, and we lived there until I was 13-year-old. During that time, my father had to go back to the Aldershot and the barracks, and he went part of Wingate's expedition into Burma, and he went to India first, and then they went into Burma, and it was the first expeditionary force, and it was a little bit of a disaster. The rivers were overflowing with water. They had no boats, and they couldn't take any heavy machinery, and he went across the river with all the other soldiers, and then they got split up because he had trouble with his feet, and he heard gunfire, and then he still tried to make his way through the jungle. He didn't know where he was going, and then he found a Burmese village, and he went to it, and they gave him food, and then they told the Japanese he was there, and the Japanese came to pick him up, and he became a prisoner of war then. I can remember the day that my mother sat my brother on the bed. He'd be around about 5 years old. This would be 1940, 42, late 42, maybe 43. Sat him on the bed, and she had one of these envelopes which they got from the post office in those days, because it was a delivery one, and there was they usually had young boys who rode a red bike with these telegrams, and they were just pasted onto a piece of paper. And when women in the war got one of those and knew that there was trouble regarding injuries to the husbands, and then it said, "Your husband's missing in action, presumed dead. We're very sorry." And that's all there was to it. Soon after she told us, the ladies down the road started coming in, and they'd seen the telegraph boy, and they knew there was a problem, and they were very helpful and kind. I started school at the school up the road, which was St John's School. It had 3 classes, with round about 50 children in each class, and it was a very happy place. The first class I went in was Miss Oddy's. Miss Oddy was a nice teacher, but I wasn't very keen on school. And when my mother took me there, I actually left it to go home to meet my mother. My mother brought me back again, and she was quite cross. Miss Oddy wasn't very keen on me either, because I'd kicked her in the ankle, and I sat beside a little girl who was really quite a pleasant little girl, but I must admit I wasn't very fond of her, and I wouldn't talk to her, and I was a little bit difficult. And then I went through the classes, and then when I was 8 years old, I went to Fox Lane Junior School. And in those days, if a child was disabled, they called them spastics, and most children who were called spastics couldn't. They tended to have low intelligence because they'd been damaged at birth, because it was usually to do with birth, and they classified me as a spastic, unable to be taught anything. But my mother pushed me along and wanted me to enrol for taking the 11+ exam. And the teacher brought my mother into school to tell her that. They didn't think I'd be able to do it because I was educationally subnormal. And so I went through most of my school life believing that I hadn't the ability, mainly because other people didn't think there was anything there. But I found school life very pleasant. When I was 11 years old, I then went to, it would be the high school in Leyland. And it was a good school. It was very interesting. But again, on the entrance exam, I did very well. I went in the top class, which was Group 1. And they didn't believe I had the ability to do it, and they said I must have been watching somebody else. So they moved me to class 5, at the bottom, of the lowest grade. But they were very kind in other ways. I couldn't do the sports, so they gave me jobs with mates. We marked out the cricket pitches, we marked out the football pitches. And then there was a little problem with the marking of the football pitches, which resulted in it being taken off me, and I was given a job as gardening captain. And unfortunately, there was an incident with a hoe, which again resulted in me being taken off that job to look after the fruit bushes. And during the summer holidays, the fruit was coming in, the fruit was getting ripe, and we were supposed to be collecting the fruit, and we had a series of jars to fill with this fruit. Somebody had the bright idea that if we squashed the fruit down, it would make jam. So we had all of us squashing the fruit down to make jam. Unfortunately, when the teacher who would give us this task came to see us, she was a little bit distressed, and I had that job taken off me as well. I think, I'm not saying I was being picked on, but I was a little bit unfortunate at times with the things I did, but I was always very enthusiastic. When I was 13, they moved to Preston, and I went to live in Far Road in Preston, and I was lost there, absolutely lost, and I didn't understand, I didn't know that part of Preston at all. I didn't know where I was or anything. My brother Peter, who passed 11 plus, went to Preston Grammar School, and I went to St John's, I went to St Mark's. And St Mark's was okay, and there was a man there headmaster called Mr Waddington. And Mr Waddington was very interested in science, and he got talking to us. Usually in his classes he spent a little bit of time talking about the stars, and because I'd had an interest in it, I started answering and getting involved in it. It surprised me. And one day he came across to me and says, I'm in Preston Astronomical Society, I'm the secretary. Would you like to come and see the observatory on Moor Park? And he said, you seem very interested and you seem to know a lot about it. So I can remember going to the council room at the old town hall in the centre of Preston. I'd never been in such a posh place. And I used to go to meetings there, and he used to encourage me. And then it got burned down, the town hall, which was nothing at all to do with me. I then was leaving school. I was due to leave school at 15. And Mr Waddington had worked hard, and he had a word with the employment exchange about trying to get me a job, and they got me a job as a scientific glassblower, as an apprentice scientific glassblower, providing I was suitable. And usually it had to be people with GCs, because scientific glassblowing was quite a good job, because most glass instruments were made by hand. You know, the first person I met there was a bloke called Huey Elm, who was a very, very kind man. And he put me on some jobs, and he put me with a man called Bill Willisey. Bill Willisey was maybe in his late 70s, extremely bad-tempered, tended to snap a lot, but he was a fantastic glass blower, and he made me work hard doing glass, and I did do, and I was doing all right. And I can remember one incident, I had to draw glass which was 18 millimetres in diameter down to about 5 millimetres, and it wasn't easy, but I managed to get it. But when you drew the glass, which was to heat the tube of 20 millimetres, you drew it out, and then you had to burn the end of it, and then put the piece down that you'd drawn out, but that meant the other piece was quite warm. And when you drew it out, you had to be careful where the piece went. Now, I think I caught Bill's ear, because this scream came from beside me, and I took off, and then Bill took off after me, and I went and hid in the toilets, and apparently the hot piece of glass, when I stretched it out the next time, I stretched it a little bit too far, and it went into his ear. So he went off me a bit, and he wouldn't help me for a few weeks until Huey Elm got him helping me. I went into competitions for glass blowing, and I did quite well, and I won a prize, because it was with a company called Rugby Engineering. And because of that, I then went on to doing more complex work on glass blowing, and because of that, I was transferred to the laboratory, and that's where I was working. And I met a man called Jim Meadowcroft. I need a break now. School was a very interesting place. I enjoyed school, but I was very rebellious. I know that, because I had a fire in my belly which would never go out. My first memory was lying on a bed, having trouble breathing, couldn't move my arms and legs. Now no, my mum was crying, and a posh looking gentleman with a bag stood there, and he went out, and apparently he said that I had what they called infantile paralysis. They didn't know about polio, and that it was highly unlikely at my age, which was 4 years old, I would survive, and that I would probably die a suffocation. And they couldn't put me in an iron lung because they didn't have them for children. But as time went on, I improved, and apart from being paralysed in one leg, everything else seemed okay. So I lived that okay. When I went to school, I was always considered education subnormal. It just wasn't, mainly because that when at childbirth a lot of children had brain damage, which not only affected the physical ability but also affected the mental ability. And they had this word spastic, they were spastic, and that classified people of limited ability and just something to carry through life. And so most of my school life that was there, and I was introduced as a spastic child. I didn't quite understand it, but it was there. So the expectations was virtually zero. But the people at school were very kind and they dealt with it. But I knew this was taking place and it tended to upset me. The thing which always irritated me was having to wear a caliper. I kept taking it off and then my mum would have to put it back on again, and this went on, and then I undid the screws and then there was trouble with it all the way around. But I lived with it, and I had a friend called Arthur Cumberland. And Arthur Cumberland and I were close together. And when we were about 11 years old, we were in a class which was on the first floor of the school. And they had a new teacher because the teacher was off sick, who wasn't familiar with the class. And what we decided to do was to take the screws out of my iron. So Arthur, after taking the screws out of my iron, Arthur said to the teacher, "Please miss, Roy Horton's leg's falling off," which always drove people into panic. And the teacher did come, so what happened? What happened? He said, "Oh, I usually take him home." He said, "It'll be all right." And she said to the class, the class said, "Yes." So I draped my arms over Arthur's shoulders and he takes me along with my iron, dragging along the floor. When we got outside, there was a path, a public footpath. We got onto it and we put the screw back again. And just as we walked down the path, which was opposite the classroom of the school, we came across a rope hanging from a tree and we couldn't leave it. So, with gay abandonment, we started swinging from the rope. But what we didn't realise, that some of the sneaky children had told the teacher that we're swinging on a swing, and she went to see us. And when we went back the next day, we had quite a rough time with her, because for the time she was teaching us, for about 5 weeks, she gave us no mercy, and she was chasing around all over, and she was so angry with us. Yeah, because I couldn't do any, is this okay, Lee?
Yeah.
Because I couldn't do any sports, they tended to give me jobs, and I could always pick a couple of children to help me, which made me very, very popular. And one of the jobs was to mark out the football pitch with a machine which had like whitewash in it, and it had a system which transferred a wheel in the whitewash to the wheel at the front, which marked it out. And there was an intermediate wheel which you had to take out when you were moving it along, so you weren't making a white trail all over it, and then put it back again when you needed to do it. And we marked this pit. There was a match on Saturday morning. It was Friday afternoon, about 2 o'clock on a nice sunny day, and we marked the pitch out, and we took our time because we were just going over the marks in the pitch already. When we got bored and we sat there, and then the two of my friends who were coming to help me started chasing each other, one chasing the other with the marking device. After that we put it away and went home. Unfortunately, he hadn't removed the intermediate wheel, and on Saturday morning they were faced with a football pitch covered with white lines, which seemed to upset people very much, because on the Monday we had to go before the headmaster, and we said it was stuck and we couldn't remove it, and that's why it was like that, but we'd done our best. And he was very very sympathetic towards us, and he told the sports master that really we should have had more help to do it. I then became a gardening captain to look after the garden, and I used to look after the tools and everything. And a few of the class, when we went to collect the tools, there was 3 of them, started throwing hose around. I don't know what happened, but one of the hose hit another lad on his nose and cut it, and there was quite a fuss about it. He had to go to hospital, and his parents came in, and we were all in trouble, and I stood at the back of my mates trying to keep out of trouble, and then they moved me to the front of my mates, and I had to explain to them what happened to the hose, and we just said he walked in front of the hose, but in actual fact what was happening, they were throwing hoses at each other like spears, and they took me off that job. I then got a similar job on, they got me another job because I couldn't do the sports and they had to do something with me. When one of them in the holiday was just to pick the fruit, and it was raspberries and blackcurrants, and they gave us a series of jars to put them in, and we did, but then we ran out of jars. We had the bright idea of squashing them down to make jam. We squashed it all down, and we got rows of these jars with squashed fruit in them because it had been a good summer. And when the teacher came, she was a bit disappointed with us, and they took me off that job. I was always interested in biology, and one of the things we decided to do was to calculate the amount of soil that the worms turn over and bring up to the surface. We had to mark out a square yard and then collect all the worm casts each day and weigh them. We did it. So we had a room, there was a room there, and we found some scales, and so we went out and each day we collected the worm casts, we brought them back and we weighed them and we put them in the book, and we were plotting graphs of it, and we were supposed to turn it over after 6 weeks. And one day I'd gone to get some more worm casts, and I came down the corridor, and this lady was, one of the teachers, well, a lady was shouting. When I went in, the lads who were doing it with me were being shouted at by this lady, and apparently we'd been using the bacon scales for weighing the worm casts, and she took exceptions to us, saying that would pollute the food. So unfortunately they found somebody else to do that job as well. Often at school I didn't quite understand what all the fuss was about. I can remember one incident, there was a lady teacher called Mrs. Thatcher, who was a very nice teacher, and somebody said to me, Mrs. Thatcher's a Catholic, and I didn't know what a Catholic was. I didn't understand it. He said, ask her. So I said to her, are you a Catholic, Mrs. Thatcher? In which she exploded and says I was a rude boy, and said I had to go and see the headmaster. I went up to the headmaster, and she's telling the story there, and I didn't know what the fuss was about, and he didn't seem to know what the fuss was about, but she went off me a bit. I always wanted to slide, and the playground, the kids used to put when it was going to be cold, they used to throw water down, and you could get a slide almost 20 yards long, and the kids used to run and go down the slide, and then 2 of the lads said they'll take me on the slide, and what they did, one got each arm and ran like mad down the slide, and I got a speed up and I loved it, and then they let go, and when I hit the end of the slide I went arse over head, fell to the floor. I said, but it really was great, because I'd never done anything like this before. But again, in the school, at the teacher's restroom, somebody spotted me through the window, and suddenly, just as I was in mid-flight, 3 teachers came running out after me to grab me, and take me in. So while the ice was on, they wouldn't let me play out. Where I got to then. In school. Oh. There was a river which ran close to the school behind Robinson's farm, and it's called the River Lostock, and it was fantastic for swimming, and it had kingfishers and it had leeches in it, and it was a very good river. And my mother had got some new clothing, and I tended to wander. I like wandering. I found the world interesting. And after school, there were some lads had gone down with the costumes and the towels going swimming. So I went with them, and they were older boys than I was. And I watched them jump in the river, you see. And then they said, come and go swimming. And I said, no. I said, oh, you can go swimming. I said, I've got my clothes on. I said, oh, a little dry. And I jumped in the river with my clothes on. I was quite enjoying it. I did it several times. And then somebody must have told Mrs. Wilson, who used to look after me. And she came looking for me, and she encouraged me to walk faster home. It took me all the bloody way home, she did. My mother was quite upset over that because I'd ruined some new clothing. It was something else, wasn't it? Oh, one of the hobbies in autumn was scrunching pears and apples. And I'd worked out that if any farmer came or anybody came, I would be caught because I was the slowest runner. So I always used to break away from the main group and find a tree of my own and go up it. And I can remember one day, it was at Sumner's farm. I climbed up this tree, and it was a pear tree. Pear trees are very big trees, they're very tall. And I went towards the top, and as I got to the top, I saw the farmer and his dog coming through the gate across the field. It was about a quarter of a mile away. And I looked down at them collecting the apples and pears, and I looked at the farmer and decided it's better to keep quiet. So I sat up there, chewing a pear, as the farmer came, and he spotted them, and he came round and he caught about 6 or 7 of them. And then they were quite upset with me that I hadn't told them the farmer was coming, and I couldn't explain to them why I hadn't told them the farmer was coming. Yeah. St. Mark's School was a nice school, and as I said, there was a man called Mr. Waddington there, the headmaster, and he really was an intelligent and helpful man. One of the jobs I had there was an ink monitor, and me and another guy did the ink monitoring. And St. Mark's had got a tower, and there was the ordinary classrooms, and then there was some stairs up to one room, which was near the top of the tower, and it was used with ink monitors where they used to do the ink, because you had ink wells on the desks, and you had to pour ink to keep them up. So the ink monitor's job was each day ensure that all the wells were filled with ink, because it tended to evaporate. And there was 2 girls and 2 boys in it. And we'd found out that if you climbed in a little ladder beyond the ink monitor's room, you could push a lead-lined door onto the roof and crawl out, and there was about an 18-inch wall, and you could look over Preston, and it was a marvellous view. And we often did that, and these girls used to say, oh, you'll get in trouble. And then one time they said they'd like to have a look, and we said yeah. So we went up and we moved the trap door, the door off, and it was a lead-lined door, and you had to lift it and push it to one side, and it was quite heavy. We pushed it to one side, and these girls went up, and then the lad who was with me, the other ink monitor, I didn't know, he actually pulled the door back. And we went down, and then there was a bit of a fuss, and we found out these girls had been shouting over the edge because they couldn't lift the door up. And there was a little bit of problem there, and I lost my ink monitor. Lost every fucking job I ever did. it was a nice, happy school. The last, there was a boy in the class, and him and I didn't like each other, called Stinker Ettles. And the last 5 minutes at school, the headmaster went out, we went for each other, and we were rolling underneath the desk, thumping each other. And Mr. Wallington came in, we stood up there then, and I met him, we met him on a train, didn't we? I met him, I was getting on a train to go to London when I lived in London, and I met him on a train. He was in the army, and we had a good laugh together. The last 5 minutes at school, we were rolling on the floor, being cheered on by the class. Oh, bugger. I suppose I was trouble, really.